here we are in 2023. We have so many examples of new groups springing up to decree what is disinformation. People get constantly banned from the internet based on their judgments. The media cites them all the time as objective, apolitical experts. And we're now very accustomed to this. But the first time this actually happened was in 2017, right after the 2016 election when Hillary Clinton lost. And it was called Hamilton 68. And what it was designed to be this presumably sophisticated database that came from this new group that I'm about to show you, led by a union of never-Trumpers, Democrats, the U.S. security state, and Bush-era neocons like Bill Kristol. And the idea was they purported to have created a formula to determine which views and which articles were the ones being promoted most aggressively and most heavily by the Kremlin. To be able to say, oh, look, this is our secret formula for determining what is Russian disinformation and what isn't. Many times my articles were identified by them as having been promoted by Russian disinformation, even though nobody knew what their secret formula was. They refused to reveal it. Media outlets constantly relied on them for this assessment. Back in 2017, right as it emerged, I began writing about it, as did a few others. And to me, what was so notable about it was this, quote, with this new DC policy group, Democrats continue to rehabilitate and unify with Bush-era neocons. The union is far more than a marriage of convenience to stop Trump. It reflects broad-based agreement on U.S. hawkishness toward Russia and beyond. You could see this new union forming of Democrats, neocons, and the U.S. security state. That was the union that was formed to stop Trump, that endures to this very day, and that was behind this fraudulent scam called Hamilton 68. Here was the reporting I did on it at The Intercept, which was funded by Pierre Omidyar at the time, even while Pierre Omidyar was funding Bill Kristol and funding many of these actual organizations. Quote, a newly formed and by all appearances well-funded national security advocacy group devoted to more hawkish U.S. policies toward Russia and other adversaries provides the most vivid evidence yet of this alliance. Calling itself the Alliance for Securing Democracy. They always pick very noble and neutral sounding names. Who could be opposed to the Alliance for Securing Democracy? The group describes itself as a, quote, bipartisan transatlantic initiative that will develop comprehensive strategies to defend against, deter, and raise the cost on Russian and other state actors' efforts to undermine democracy and democratic institutions. They will also, quote, work to publicly document and expose Vladimir Putin's ongoing efforts to subvert democracy in the United States and Europe. It is, in fact, the ultimate union of mainstream democratic foreign policy officials and the world's most militant and militaristic neocons. The group is led by two long-time Washington foreign policy hands, one from the establishment Democratic wing and the other a key figure among leading GOP neocons. The Democrat who led the group is named Laura Rosenberger. She served as a foreign policy advisor for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign and a chief of staff to two Obama national security officials. The Republican is Jamie Fly, who spent the last 4 years as counselor for foreign and national security affairs to one of the Senate's most hawkish members, Marco Rubio. Prior to that, he served in various capacities in the Bush Pentagon and National Security Council. Isn't it amazing, by the way, that we constantly hear the two parties can never get along, they're at each other's throat, and yet all the time you find them in complete union with one another on the most consequential matters? My reporting went on, quote, the Democrats' new partner, Jamie Fly, spent 2010 working in tandem with Bill Kristol, the supreme neocon, urging military action against Iran. In a 2010 Weekly Standard article co-written by Kristol, Fly argued that, quote, the key to changing Iran's thinking about its nuclear program is a serious debate about the military option, adding, quote, it's time for Congress to seriously explore an authorization of military force to halt Iran's nuclear program. When it comes to this new group, the alliance of Democrats with the most extreme neocon elements is visible beyond the group's leadership. Its board of advisors is composed of both leading Democratic foreign policy experts along with the nation's most extremist neocons. So alongside Jake Sullivan, who at the time was the national security advisor to Joe Biden in the Clinton campaign, he's now Biden's national security advisor, you had on this board of this Hamilton 68 project, Mike Morell, Obama's acting CIA director, Mike McFaul, Obama's ambassador to Russia, sitting next to Mike Chertoff, Bush's Homeland Security Secretary, Mike Rogers, the far-right, supremely hawkish former congressman who now hosts a right-wing radio show, and Bill Kristol himself. Now, beyond that, it was often funded by people like Pierre Omidyar, and we have here a article that I actually wrote about Pierre Omidyar's funding of a lot of these disinformation regimes. And here from Politico, you see how often this Hamilton 68 dashboard was used. They just swallowed it like whole cloth. They started using this Hamilton 68 dashboard to accuse people of being Russian agents and stories being promoted by the Kremlin. So here's a February 2018 story by Politico entitled "Russia Pushes More, quote, Deep State Hashtag." They were trying to say that the term deep state was a Kremlin-pushed and a Kremlin-concocted propaganda term, even though the term deep state has been used to describe the United States security state for decades by leftist foreign policy scholars and paleo-conservative ones as well. Overnight, it suddenly became one that was supposed to be a Russian disinformation campaign. Quote, after the success of the viral, quote, "Release the Memo" campaign, which they also blamed on Russia, Russia-influenced Twitter accounts are test running other hashtags designed to stoke anger, particularly among supporters of President Donald Trump, against deep state forces, according to analysts at Hamilton 68, a website that tracks Russian-influenced Twitter accounts. Last week, a host of new hashtags trended in the network of accounts monitored by Hamilton 68, including, quote, "FISAgate," "Obama Deep State," "We the People Demand Justice," the me more reveals the coup, and even Obama legacy is Obamagate. These were just standard conservative principles and causes that got labeled as Russian propaganda campaigns because of this alliance of for security democracy. The Politico went on. None of these had taken hold, but the flurry of new efforts indicated to Brett Schaefer, an analyst for the Alliance for Securing Democracy, which runs Hamilton 68, that the Russians would continue to push issues related to, quote, "the deep state." Here's another article from Mother Jones. Trump supporters spread the majority of phony news on social media. They also, of course, used Hamilton 68. And before we get to Matt, let me just show you a couple of videos of how frequently this fraudulent framework of this database that nobody knew how it worked and they refused to show you, one funded by Pierre Omidyar, this new group of a union of the CIA and neocons and Democrats. Look how often it infiltrated into and contaminated our news. Here from NBC News.
Kremlin-linked accounts flooded Twitter, using hashtags like Parkland and Gun Control Now to get into trending conversations. According to data collected by the nonpartisan dashboard Hamilton 68, the trolls then added more incendiary hashtags and explosive imagery to drive their readers to more partisan conversations.
Yeah, none of this is normal. Also, we keep talking about how the Russians tried to interfere in our last election. Well, they're interfering, and the interference continues. Not only did they interfere in the last election, when we had Devin Nunes trying to release a memo to undermine an investigation into Russia, they were extraordinarily active. The Russians, their Secret Service, their bots, flooding with hashtags "release the memo" to try to interfere in an American debate, to try to derail a Russian investigation. And then we saw again yesterday, once again, the Russian bots, and obviously connected with Russian intel agencies, getting involved in a school shooting to try to stir up unrest and undermine our democracy. The great news today, this week, has been that we had 4 intel chiefs that spoke independently of the president's.
Now, again, let's always leave to the side the hilarity of being this upset that Russia is interfering in our sacred democracy through some bots, given how the United States interferes in every country in the world, including Russia, through much more aggressive interventionist tactics. All of this was based on this preposterous and idiotic data framework that no one knew how it worked, and that came from the most trained liars in America: Bill Kristol, neocons, hawkish Democrats, and the U.S. security state. Here is the video montage put together by the genius Matt Orfella, who's a videographer who works with Matt, just to show you how frequently this Hamilton 68 dashboard was treated as the gospel by media outlets.
You and your team, you guys created a website, Hamilton 68.
Yes, my colleagues and I, we tracked Russian accounts.
That's some bullshit.
So they're literally right now there are Russian bots, according to your website, that are putting this out into the world. Is that correct?
It's bull.
Now, we're about to get to Matt, and I just, before we do, I just want to show you a couple of the key revelations that he was able to reveal today by going through these Twitter files. This is pure journalism. First of all, here is an excerpt of an email in which even Twitter itself, including some of the liberals in Twitter that you've gotten to know, like Yoel Roth, are acknowledging that the entire purpose of Hamilton 68 is, quote, it falsely accuses a bunch of legitimate right-leaning accounts of being Russian bots. All of those causes about Parkland, about wanting to see the new FISA memo, about complaining about the FBI's lying to spy on Carter Page, these came from Republicans and classic conservatives, and Bill Kristol and his scheming liars in the CIA pretended to have secret data that proved that this was actually coming from Russia. That's why I say, and it's not hyperbole, that the strategy of the Democratic Party became to accuse every one of their opponents, all dissent to Democratic Party politics, as being an agent of the Kremlin, wittingly or otherwise. Even the ideologues at Twitter started recognizing, because what was happening is they were being pressured to use Hamilton 68 to censor all of these hashtags on the grounds that they came from Russia. But even Twitter could recognize, quote, the whole purpose of the project was to falsely accuse legitimate right-leaning accounts of being Russian bots. Taibbi went on, quote, news outlets for years cited Clint Watts, who was formerly of the FBI, and Hamilton 68 when claiming Russian bots were, quote, amplifying an endless parade of social media causes against strikes in Syria, in support of Foxho's Laura Ingraham, the campaign of both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. All of this got characterized by Hamilton 68 and then by the idiots in our corporate media as being the byproduct not of Americans on their own deciding this was important, but by the Kremlin. Taibbi also reported, quote, the secret ingredient to Hamilton 68's analytical method, a list. They had a secret list of people they claimed were connected to the Kremlin. Like Joe McCarthy used to walk around with his briefcase, claiming I have a secret list in my briefcase of people in the United States who are actually agents of Russia. That's exactly what these operatives at Hamilton 68 did. And they would say, quote, our analysis has linked 600 Twitter accounts to Russian influence activities online. That was how they put it at their launch. But they refused to tell you which 600 Twitter accounts, the whole basis of their analysis, they had decided were really Kremlin agents. Taibbi went on, Hamilton 68 never released the list, claiming, quote, the Russians will simply shut the accounts down. That was their excuse for why they wouldn't tell you who were these Russian agents on which their entire scam was based. All those reporters and TV personalities making claims about, quote, Russian bots never really knew what they were describing. In other words, the media took this data and took these claims, blindly published it. You just saw the video of them doing it without having the slightest idea what any of this meant. Matt went on, quote, Twitter executives were in a unique position to recreate Hamilton's list, reverse engineering it from the site's request for Twitter data. So Twitter knew what was on this list because these were the accounts that these people were demanding be censored from Twitter. Concerned about the deluge of Hamilton-based news stories, they did so, and what they found shocked them. So Twitter actually did the work to reverse engineer this list, and when they did it, they were shocked by what they found. These accounts, they concluded, are neither strongly Russian nor strongly bots. No evidence to support the statement that the dashboard is a finger on the pulse of Russian information ops, hardly illuminating a massive influence operation. So even the very liberal and democratic partisan ideologues at Twitter immediately saw this as the fraud that it was. In layman's terms, the Hamilton 68 barely had any Russians. In fact, apart from a few RT accounts, it's mostly full of ordinary Americans, Canadians, and British. It was a scam, Matt said. Instead of tracking how Russia influenced American attitudes, Hamilton 68 simply collected a handful of mostly real, mostly American accounts and described their organic conversations as Russian scheming. So even though Twitter knew the whole thing was a scam, they never presented the data to the American public. They watched all along as our leading media outlets, the people who tell you they're the only ones on whom you can rely for the truth, use what all along was a creepy and a despotic attempt to create a secret list of people who were supposed to be foreign agents that was all based on a lie the entire time. And Matt has all the details and the proof that it's a lie because he just went through the Twitter files and did what a journalist should do and uncovered that. This is a story about this entire industry of fake disinformation experts, about how our corporate media aligned with them and launders whatever they say, even though there's no basis to any of it, and especially this union that has been in power for years now of the Democratic Party, the U.S. security state led by the CIA, and neocons. That's the real power center that's behind this. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.